Eric, first of all, thank you for accepting our interview. Could you briefly introduce yourself to us?
Well, my story was first reported by Australia's ABC. Their program Four Corners did a documentary on me, and they also published some written reports. If anyone is interested, they can look those up. Basically, I previously worked under the First Bureau of China's Ministry of Public Security, specifically within the Chongqing Political Security Brigade. I worked for that unit. Around 2008, I joined the China Social Democratic Party online. Some people may have heard of it. Its earliest chairman was Liu Guokai, whom many people know. At the time, I served as the director of the Chongqing branch of the party. However, in reality, I hadn't developed other members. It was basically just me. I suspect that some traces of my online activity were exposed, which drew the attention of the authorities. Back then, the unit was still called the State Security Brigade before it was renamed Political Security. 4 officers from the State Security Brigade came and took me to a local police station for questioning. After that, they attempted to turn me, to recruit me to work for them. They likely felt my position was convenient for infiltration work, particularly targeting the China Social Democratic Party. Everyone knows the methods they use, coercion and inducement, including threats against family members. After considering it, I agreed. Part of the reason was self-justification. On one hand, I didn't want to go to prison. On the other hand, I told myself I wanted to understand how their repression system worked. Later, I gradually put this into practice. Initially, I continued focusing on the Chongqing branch of the party, maintaining contact with Liu Guokai, and collecting information on the party's activities. As trust in me increased, I was eventually sent overseas. Some of these cases are well known. For example, the operation targeting rebel pepper Wang Liming. We carried out an operation in Cambodia under the Prince Group. The Prince Group has since been sanctioned by the U.S. Department of Justice, with roughly USD 15 billion worth of assets seized, including over 120,000 bitcoins belonging to its boss, Chen Zi. I was embedded within the Prince Group as cover, initially in their HR and administration department, later as a planning director. My task was to approach Wang Liming. The authorities wanted to lure Wang Liming to Cambodia and abduct him. However, I did everything I could to protect him. I suggested alternatives, such as going to Japan, so I could warn him in person. I also proposed changing the operation location to Singapore or Taiwan, which in fact was also meant to protect him. Those on the ground may not have realized the political risks, but I knew that higher authorities would likely reject the plan. And indeed, although abducting someone in Taiwan was technically feasible according to the Prince Group, the plan was ultimately vetoed due to political risk. Beyond the Cambodia case, there were other operations, including the Huaiyang case, reported by ABC. I also used this opportunity to establish the V Brigade. There were other incidents not covered in media reports. For example, ABC reported that I once tried to seek refuge at the U.S. consulate, failed, and returned to China. What wasn't disclosed is that I actually agreed to work for the U.S. government and returned to China as a double agent. This arrangement was brief and did not continue, as we felt the differences in operational thinking were too great and extremely dangerous. Eventually, I cut off contact with the U.S. government. That, roughly, is my life story.
What I'm more interested in is when you joined the China Social Democratic Party, you were only 22 and still in college, right?
When I first came into contact with the China Social Democratic Party, it's actually been so long now, it's probably been about 20 years. At the very beginning, when I first learned how to get around the firewall, the software I used was developed by Falun Gong, things like DynaWeb and Freegate, those circumvention tools. Back then, I accidentally came across the China Social Democratic Party's website online, and then I sent them an email to apply to join. As for exactly when that first contact happened, I honestly don't remember clearly. It might have been 2007 or even earlier. It could have been when I was still in university, or maybe after I had already left. My memory on that part is a bit blurry.
What I'm curious about is you were still quite young at the time. What made you think about joining the China Social Democratic Party? What kind of considerations did you have back then? And did you realize that it could be dangerous?
Because my anti-communist thinking had existed long before that. It wasn't something that only started after I joined the China Social Democratic Party. I'd been dissatisfied with the Communist Party for a long time. How should I put it? Actually, my ideological change was similar to many other people's. When people first received the kind of indoctrination education in China, You know, they tend to lean toward nationalism at first. For a period of time, many people commonly feel that maybe the communist government is too soft in foreign affairs, not tough enough. At that time, as a nationalist, I also had that kind of thinking. I was dissatisfied with the Communist Party, thinking, why is it so weak on issues like the South China Sea or other matters? So I was already dissatisfied with the party at that time. And once you are dissatisfied, when you come across materials that criticize the party or expose some of its actions, you're more likely to accept them. Later, by chance, I came into contact with related materials, including information about the Tiananmen massacre and about some of the party's past history. My aversion toward the Communist Party increased. From a personal perspective, I'm a history enthusiast. I really like history, especially World War II history. I'm also quite familiar with fascist parties and the Nazi Party. So when a group or organization has a fascist nature or style, it's relatively easy for me to recognize it, because totalitarian organizations tend to operate in similar ways, including their propaganda and brainwashing methods. As I learned more about the CCP's history, and given that I'm a history enthusiast, it became very intuitive for me to associate the Communist Party with fascism and the Nazi Party, and I saw similarities between them. Gradually, I shifted from being a nationalist to someone with democratic and more liberal ideas. Later, I came to understand that what truly hinders this country's strength and progress is actually the Communist Party itself, its authoritarian system, its dictatorship, its totalitarian rule and methods. What would truly be better for China would be turning it into a free and democratic country. That would be best for the nation. At that level, my original nationalism, that simple, instinctive patriotism, became combined with liberal democratic ideas. And that made me believe that overthrowing the Communist Party was the best choice for the country.
You said you're very interested in history, but from what I understand, the history accessible in China since I was young has already been censored and rewritten by the Communist Party, retold according to their materialist and Marxist framework. It's very difficult to see real history. So, where did you learn the history you are talking about?
First of all, history still has a basic framework of facts. Sometimes they alter parts of Chinese history, but foreign history doesn't change that much. For example, the history of Nazism or fascist history in Japan, Germany, Italy, those things are not really hidden. In some cases, they're even emphasized. So even through school education, you can still learn a lot about fascist actions and practices. You get a sense of what fascism is in essence, its structure and behavior. Also, back then, school textbooks did talk about some previous mistakes made by the Communist Party, including some errors during the Cultural Revolution. When you read about the fanaticism and irrationality of that period, people who like to think will start reflecting. Some people may connect those things with other problematic organizations in history. Later, I also happened to see information about the Tiananmen massacre. When I was young, I remember seeing some Tiananmen student movement footage on television, though it was edited by state TV. For example, showing soldiers being hanged or burned. That incident stayed in my mind. Later, when I got Circumvention software and went online beyond the firewall, I was exposed to information from outside China. Once you open that door, you begin actively looking for more tools to access more information. It becomes a process from accidental and passive exposure to actively seeking and expanding your understanding.
So, would you say that being able to use circumvention software at the beginning and access real information about the Tiananmen massacre and then expanding your knowledge from there played a major role in changing your understanding of the Chinese Communist Party?
It definitely helped. Circumventing the firewall in China, at least for a significant portion of people, does lead to changes in their thinking.
Mm. From what I understand, you were born in the late 1980s. For your generation, China was in a period of economic rise. People's lives were relatively improving. I don't know about your family background, but people's lives were generally okay. And in school and propaganda, everything presented China as great. So, how did you reach the conclusion that the Communist Party resembles fascism? Was it your personal experiences or something you saw in newspapers and broadcasts? Why did that lead you to that conclusion?
Like I said earlier, once you access information from outside the firewall and learn about the CCP's past political movements and methods, it becomes very clear to you that the nature of the Communist Party shares similarities with fascism. As for the so-called economic rise and national strength, I've never logically equated that with whether something is fascist. Just because a regime makes the economy strong or builds national power does not mean it isn't fascist. That logic simply doesn't hold. I've never seen those things as equivalent. Take the Nazis as an example. When they rose to power, Germany was in economic chaos. They rebuilt the economy and made Germany one of the strongest powers in Europe, industrial and militarily. But that has no necessary connection. Making a country strong doesn't mean it isn't fascist. In fact, in many cases, fascist regimes are precisely able to make a country powerful, especially militarily. So, to conclude that economic growth or national strength means the leadership is not fascist is completely illogical. In many cases, it's actually the opposite.